Okay, so we've reached the fabled last session of heart anatomy. Uh, Obviously, and I think I've said this before, this is not um, the same as what we would have done if we were all together in class. But I think it will give you enough of an overview that you can, one, successfully complete your assessment, and two, have some understanding of how your body and the circulatory system works, especially for this section looking at structure and function. We've talked about circulation and blood vessels a little bit already when we talked about the endocrine system, for instance, or the respiratory system. So, yeah, it's where we are. So in general, and we've talked about this before, like when we talked about blood too. Blood vessels carry blood, obviously, and the job of blood is to exchange nutrients, waste, and gases, so to get good things to cells and bad things away. They can transport hormones, which we've talked about with the endocrine system, as well as antibodies, which remember are part of the immune system, and they can flag invaders and such. Blood vessels help to regulate blood pressure by dilating or constricting, and can selectively direct more blood to certain tissues and less to others. So, for instance, if you are in a sympathetic nervous system activation, fight or flight, more blood would be sent to your skeletal muscles, less to your digestive system, and then vice versa if you are in a more parasympathetic state. So I talked about this at some point previously, but in general, the aorta is an artery, it's a big artery that breaks into smaller arteries. The carotid, maybe you've heard of, for instance, that's one that goes up to the brain. So we start with arteries, they get smaller, and they're called arterioles. And then they get even smaller and become capillaries. That's where the gas exchange occurs. Once oxygen leaves the red blood cells and carbon dioxide comes back in, then things are traveling back to the heart, generally, in the venules, and then the veins ending at the inferior and superior vena cava. So here, this is a nice image of what I was talking about. So here is an artery. Notice that the arteries have these muscular walls around them because the blood is being pumped directly from the left ventricle, which is very muscular, into the arteries. They have these muscles to help support and stabilize them, as well as to help move the blood along and expand or contract as needed. They get smaller, and you have arterioles. Then the capillaries, where gas exchange occurs. That's why you see this transition from oxygenated to deoxygenated. And this is true basically everywhere but the lungs. The lungs would be a little different because it's going the opposite way. Anyway, and then venules, and then leading into the larger veins. Now, notice that veins don't have that big thick layer of muscle, and they are bringing blood back up to the heart, and it is truly up a lot of times. So for veins, since they're not like pumping the blood, what happens is they have these valves that can close to help prevent backflow. It's just like we had valves in the heart that can help prevent backflow. The same thing will happen in a vein. Your skeletal muscles will help move the blood up, and then once it gets up above the valve, then the valve won't let it back down and it can go up to the next portion. So there are 3 layers or tunics in the blood vessels. And again, this is just kind of so you've seen it and heard it. I won't be asking about this later. So the tunica interna is the endothelium, the inside layer. Tunica media is the smooth muscles that allows the vessels to dilate or constrict, controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. So if that was activated, blood vessels in the muscles would expand, those in the gut would constrict, kind of thing. And then the tunica externa, the outermost layer, is fibrous connective tissue, giving it some strength and stability. So as I was talking about in the previous picture, arterial blood is pumped by the heart, and the heart's continuously pumping and pushing blood through the arteries. Veins, by the time blood gets to the veins, they don't have that constant pumping as much. And so your skeletal muscles, as they move, they help to push blood up. And again, you can see those valves, so the blood gets squished up, and then it can't go back down. And then it'll get squished up, but can't get back down. So a little bit of a different structure in the veins because they have to do a little bit more of the work to get blood back up to the heart. Here are the capillary beds. So these are where gas exchange is happening. Oxygen and nutrients will cross out to the cells, and then carbon dioxide and things will cross into the blood. And if needed, blood can be regulated. There are sometimes these little sphincters that can reroute blood to different locations if needed. We talked about the cardiac cycle and all of the sort of indicators that you might need to get a full measure of cardiac cycle. Likewise, for circulation, there are some vital signs that can give you a good picture of how a person's circulation is doing. So the arterial pulse, so if you find your pulse in your neck, for instance, that would be an arterial pulse. That'll tell you something about heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, and body temperature. All of those can be indications relating to circulation and heart function and things like that. Blood pressure itself is a measure of the pressure, the force blood exerts on the large arteries. The systolic number is at the peak of ventricular contraction, so when the heart is doing its biggest squeeze. And then diastolic is the pressure when the ventricles relax. So depending on where you're measuring it, blood pressure will decrease as you move away from the heart because it's getting further away. But it should always be a larger number, obviously, at the peak of ventricular contraction than when the ventricles are relaxed. And then this is just kind of a cool little picture that labels the parts of the heart. So that concludes heart anatomy. So make sure there are lots and lots of resources on Schoology. Make sure you take a look at all of those. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Bye, guys.